I'm Deb Flaschenberg. I'm the founder and director here at the Prenatal Yoga Center. I'm also a labor support doula and Lamaze teacher and mother of two. So before I entered this birth world, I was a singer-dancer for many, many years. And I started to recognize there was a relationship between throat and openness of the pelvis. So when I would do my warm-ups with my teacher and we would do these vocal exercises, I really had quite a range. For those singers out there, like my top was around the E above high C, so I really had quite a range. And yet sometimes when I would be doing pieces that end on a high G, which is far below that E above high C, I would get really tight. And in fact, I had what I call Deborah-isms, that we would just turn the page to the end. I'd see that money note there. And at the top of the page, I'd still start to freak out in my head, like, here it comes, and I'd start to get really tight. So one day, one of my teachers had me do this thing where I was just kind of moving my hips around. And ever since then, like when I was doing that exercise, almost like hula hooping, the note just flew out. It was spinning, it was beautiful, it was round, it was a really beautiful way to release. And so I started recognizing there's a relationship between tightness in the pelvis and tightness in the throat. So then keeping with that, because I kept singing for quite a while, then eventually I got into the birth world and I started to attend births. And I noticed how the women were making sounds. So sound is a normal part of labor, you know, moaning and all of that. And I noticed that when the women were really tight, like think when you're uncomfortable, like if you stub your toe or burn yourself, the first thing is you tighten up. Your throat, your shoulders lift, you tighten up. So I was listening to the sound that a lot of women were making. And it was this really tight sound. And I started to notice there's a relationship. If they can open their throat instead of being more like ha or ah, it's opening the pelvis. So here we are thinking that during birth, we don't want the throat to constrict because that's going to engage the pelvic floor. So I started working with my students and I started working with my pregnant women on the sounds they were making, to be aware of the sounds. And even if they didn't feel comfortable making an actual sound, maybe just a sigh or a flutter the lips, because any of that, the breath is passing through the throat. And if the breath is easily passing through the throat, we know the pelvis is going to open up. So I wanted that the throat, the breath to be free on the exhale so that I know that the pelvic floor muscles are relaxing. Because if we're trying to soften the pelvis and let the baby come down and through the pelvic, through the vaginal canal, we shouldn't be so gripped and tight. So I started working with my students, and a lot of them were resistant. So during class, we would make sound. We'd be in a comfortable pose. Maybe we're holding warrior two for a while, or this pose I called screaming toe. We're stretching out the feet. And I could see the tension kind of percolating up, that the shoulders were starting to lift, and the jaw was starting to tighten, and the throat was starting to get really tight. And I'd invite them to just make sound. And, you know, I'd be like, okay, we might feel corny, it might feel strange, but what would happen if you just sigh, or not even a vocal sound? And so if they could get used to it here on the mat with us all doing it at the same time, maybe it would be something in their repertoire when they needed that in their toolkit. And then when I was attending births, if I heard the moms make these screechy, tight sounds, I would breathe with them. I would bring the sound, my open sound, to help them match it and bring it down. So I really found that that was an instrument to help them get into their bodies. And it was interesting, not long ago I was doing a workshop, I was taking a workshop on the pelvic floor, and one of the physical therapists brought up this study, and it was really interesting. I'll have to pull it out and I'll put it on the notes if you want, or you guys can email me. And it was specifically about adrenaline and the reaction of the upper trapezius. That's this part, the upper part of the back and the neck area. And when a woman or anyone felt anxiety or adrenaline would go up, the trapezius would engage. And then what would contract would be the pelvic floor muscles. They reacted to the trapezius. So I started to think about the way that the pushing stage is often done here in the hospitals. You know, oftentimes there's a directed pushing, and sometimes you can get a very excited care provider kind of counting, cheering like they're at a football game. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that, if you imagine that you're trying to open up and birth and be vulnerable, could you imagine what's going to happen if someone's kind of yelling at you to push, push, push? likely the adrenaline is going to start to spike up. And what the study was showing, when the adrenaline goes up and the trapezius are engaged, the pelvic floor muscles are co-contracting. So again, if we're trying to birth and soften the pelvic floor to let the baby through, we need to keep all of this relaxed. So what I would tell my women, my clients, is that, even my students here, when they're pushing, try to keep all of this relaxed. I call it the dumb face, that the jaw is slack, the shoulders are released, and even though there's a lot of effort, that they're not tightening and letting their adrenaline rise. So here's that idea: open throat, open vagina. If the throat and voice and jaw and breathway is open, the pelvic floor is going to mirror that. So we can practice that here on the mat. You can practice that when you're pushing. You can practice that with your partner. So there's really a lot of opportunities to start to work that into your birth experience. So we've talked a little bit about this. I have it also written on a blog. It was published in Midwifery Today as well. So you can check out on our website, prenatalYogaCenter.com. If you go to blogs and then just type in open throat, open vagina, you can find that. So we have a few minutes left. And I just want to know if anyone had any questions or any experience with it yourself. During my own second birth, I was kind of able to step back and hear the sounds I was making. And for a moment, I'm thinking, like, oh, wow, that's pretty good. It's a pretty open sound for as far as I was in labor. All right, so I guess I must have answered everyone's questions, or perhaps just no questions today, or no comments, or no experience in this yourself. Again, I just want to thank you so much for listening to Open Throat, Open Vagina, and I hope you have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much. Namaste.